So the day is finally here. It's been a month since the Switch has been out. All of us have had a chance to really get into it, really play it, including myself. A lot of people did reviews like the first day it was out, which to me didn't make a lot of sense since there were a lot of features still disabled, a lot of games still had to come out, and really at the time it was you play Zelda offline as a reviewer, and that was pretty much it. There was also 1-2 Switch and Bomberman, but for the most part it was a Zelda machine. So I thought finally it's about time I looked at the Switch, gave you guys my thoughts and a fair, impartial review, and maybe look towards the future with this system as well, because I do think that this is the system that Nintendo has wanted to make for quite a while now, and they've finally been able to do it. Now, real quick, the system itself comes with pretty much everything you need. It comes with a dock, comes with an HDMI cable, power cord, 2 Joy-Cons that are attached or detached. All this stuff these are all things you've already seen. Like, you've seen an unboxing thousands of different ways. I mean, I did a full live one, which had a lot of people watching. We did all of that. So I'm not going to go over too much of that. Now, we do know a little more about the hardware than we did when it first came out. We've had die shots and everything, so we know it does have an X1. It has 4 gigs of low-power DDR4 memory, and it has a 32 gig of flash NAND memory. And that's pretty much all there is to it internally. Now, there are a lot of other things in the Joy-Cons, HD Rumble, there is the Amiibo scanner, IR pointer. There's a lot of stuff technology-wise in the Joy-Cons, but overall, the system itself is built well, and it is packing some pretty good technology. So my initial thoughts when I had the Switch was a key word here. It's a word you're going to hear a lot, and it really kind of sums up the entire thing about the Switch and why it's such a cool system, and that is convenience. The Switch may be the most convenient system I personally have ever used. It's very cool to be able to take it with you wherever you go and then come home and pop it into a dock and it goes on the TV. Now, to be completely honest with you guys, I've played it more handheld mode than anything else. I play it in the dock occasionally, but for the most part, it stays just like this, and I play it consistently upstairs, around the house, or if I need to, I take it with me. When I went to the hospital when we were having Logan, this was right there with me next to the sofa that they provided me. Very small one, by the way. But this and my laptop are the 2 things that went in the bag first, and those are pretty much the only things I needed the entire time I was there. This kept me entertained the entire time. I got into some other games other than Zelda while I was there because I thought I'd try some new stuff. So yes, this is probably the most convenient system I've ever used. It's probably the most convenient system you've ever used, especially as you get older and maybe you have less TV time. You're going to like the Switch. So with that, let's jump over to the pros of the system that I really like. I like the form factor. I like how slim it is. It's a very thin system overall. It's very, very sleek feeling. It doesn't feel like a Nintendo system when I first grabbed it and picked it up. It felt more like something you'd expect from a premium seller like a Samsung or even an Apple device. Now, that's not to say the quality isn't as high as some of those devices, considering the front screen is plastic and not glass, but I think that was a conscious decision on their part to keep it from cracking, because trust me, phones crack all the time because they're glass. This guy went through 10 to 11 drops before it was not able to function because the screen is plastic, because it has metal framing inside. It's a well-built device. I should know, I took it apart, I checked everything out inside. It has a very good heatsink. It's large. It's definitely more than what the X1 probably needs. The temperatures are low as well. People are telling you overheat. They don't know what they're talking about. I did a full temperature probe, which you can check right here in the corner with the card. And yes, I did a full test. It was fine. The temps were very, very cool, even at the hottest points in Zelda. So don't worry about heat with this guy. Despite it being a small form factor, the amount of power it draws is minimal, and that really shows in those temps. I also really like the USB-C connection. I think this is something that Microsoft and Sony really need to wake up about. This is the port of the future. The cable is awesome. It plugs in either way. It has a lot of expandability. USB ports. You could run full video cards through it if it is rated high enough. Overall, the USB-C makes a lot of sense. It can pull more power as well, as we've seen, and get rid of these micro USB ports, please. Sony and Microsoft, at this point, you need to take a technology cue from Nintendo, which it recently sounds weird, right? Because, of course, Sony and Microsoft are all about technology and pushing these consoles further, but really Nintendo has done it with the USB-C port. It's the first system that I've ever seen console-wise that has this port. And they need to get on the ball with this, because this is the port of the future. Some other stuff I really liked. I like the Joy-Cons. I didn't think I would at first. Now, I don't do that thing where you take them off of the system and sit on the couch with your hands in either place. I don't do that. The Joy-Cons pretty much stay on the system at all times. It just doesn't get away from me. I leave them just like this. I don't really play in tabletop mode either, and the reason for that is because when I set it up in tabletop mode, I still have to be kind of close to the system. The screen itself is 6.2 inches, which is fine if you're like holding it, but when it gets kind of far away from you, a couple feet, and you start trying to read text that is legible, obviously, from being close, and you're a little further away, or if you're trying to see stuff off in the distance, like with maybe Zelda, it gets harder to really see the details and what's happening. So you have to get kind of close to it, which to me at that point, I might as well pick it up and get a really good view by holding it like a handheld. That's not to say I have not used tabletop mode at all. It worked really well for Fast RMX when I took it over to my parents' house and my brother went to check it out. It set it up at tabletop mode on the table, turned on Fast RMX, handed him a Joy-Con, and we were off, and it worked well. It really did. He ended up buying a Switch because of that, because I took it over there and showed it to him, and they liked the idea. He's a PC gamer mostly, but the Switch appeals to him, and that's the other interesting thing. Evan, PC gamer, the Switch appeals to him because of the convenience and because it's different. It's not another computer in a box. I also really like the operating system. I think right now it's fast because there's not a lot to it currently, but really I bought this system to play games on. I can watch Netflix and stuff on a million other systems, and I really wanted this OS to be fast. The Wii U was not a fast operating system most times. It took a while to get around. This one turns on in seconds. Like you hit the power button, the Nintendo logo comes up and you're off and running, or if it's in sleep mode like this one is, it's off and then on pretty quick, like almost instantly. So you're in and then you're playing. And I really like that about it. You know, it doesn't take long to jump in to your home menu and start playing. A lot of times, like when I was in the hospital, for example, things would be happening, nurses would be coming in, go into sleep mode, boom, you know, they're doing their thing, all right, we're good. Sit back on the couch, turn it back on, and I'm playing Has Been Heroes again, or Zelda, or Fast RMX right away. That, of course, goes back to the convenience factor. Very convenient system. If you're an adult, this will probably be a system you gravitate towards, even if you already have a PS4, an Xbox One, or PC, just because the games like Zelda are only on here. Granted, we've already talked about the emulation on the PC, but still, you can't take your computer with you like you can this system. It runs on a battery. Most computers that play CEMU or CEMU, whatever you want to pronounce it, apparently I'm pronouncing it wrong, it won't run off a battery because it needs so much power to do it. This is able to run off battery and is honestly quite amazing. So real quick, after talking about all that, let's talk about some of the stuff I really didn't like about the system. But what's really cool is I think a lot of the stuff Nintendo can fix going forward, whether it's in a revision or just future firmware updates, there's probably a lot of things they can do to fix some of these issues. So the first thing I didn't like, which I think a lot of people saw this right away, was that there's no D-pad on the system stock. You have other buttons here, and that's because, in this case, they had to keep the Joy-Cons pretty much the same, or at least mirrored over in some way, because most of the time, if you want to do two players, which is cool that it comes with two controllers, but it kind of boxed them into a corner. You can't have a D-pad on one and then not on the other and expect both players to have the same experience, because playing a D-pad where any one of those are A, B, X, Y is not going to be fun. So I understand why they had to do it. I was a little sad to see that. Now, of course, you can buy the Pro Controller like I did, and you have a D-pad, and that's great. But the fact that you have to buy a $70 peripheral to get that D-pad is a little off-putting. That said, though, the Pro Controller I do think is worth $70. It's an awesome controller. Battery life is ridiculous. I've charged it once. It still doesn't need to be charged. So yes, the Pro Controller, $70, well spent. Another thing I didn't like too much is, while I do think the kickstand works, it's definitely functional. It's fine. You set it up. It doesn't go anywhere unless you smack into it or push it over or something. I do think they could have done a little more with reinforcing it. I understand that there are cost measures that go into this system. We've already seen how much it costs at $257, so there wasn't a lot of wiggle room. But I do think they could probably put in a revision a slightly better kickstand. Maybe one that has another angle to it, multiple angles. Otherwise, you have to buy a stand, which is like another $15 to $20 peripheral you have to buy. But I do wish they had done that. It's not a deal breaker, obviously, because it works. I just think it's something they can fine tune and maybe improve in the future. Another big thing I didn't like, this is more getting into the tech part of the system. So if you're not really big into tech specs or anything, it might go over your head a little bit. I really wish they had been able to get the 128-bit bus that the X2 has. What I'm talking about is, we know at this point the memory bandwidth is around 25 to 26 gigabytes per second, which is kind of low. If they had managed to get that X2 bandwidth of 128-bit as opposed to 64-bit, they would have had 50 to 60 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth to work with, which is much closer to what the Xbox One has, which is around 68, and then they use their interesting ESRAM combo to get better images and quality. I do think that would have helped with resolution, because we do see some games coming out that are having an issue with resolution. Zelda runs at 900p, for example, and I do think they would have been able to get to 1080p if they had used the 128-bit bus from the X2. But what's interesting is I do think we will see the X2 in a Switch revision 2 to 3 years down the line, considering NVIDIA has now sent out consumer-type dev kits to different people who are trying to develop for these. And what's great is the X2 is very, very similar to the X1, so it would be completely backwards compatible with any games that are out there. You would just get an option of a stronger system or better battery life. I think Nintendo would opt for better battery life, maybe that 128-bit bus in a revision, so you'd go from the 3-hour battery life or so up to 5 to 6 hours. While we're right there with battery life, that's another thing that kind of bothers me, and obviously bothers a lot of other people. The battery life is lower, and it does depend. It depends on which game you're playing. When I'm playing Has-Been Heroes, it's awesome. I get 4 to 5 hours of battery life, no problem. Most times, I don't exceed that in a sitting anyway, to be honest with you guys. I have exceeded battery life sittings when I'm playing Zelda, though, in a handheld mode. And that's going to make more sense because I do have the brightness a little higher. I turned it down some, but I was still anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours of battery life. And I managed to exceed that in hospital a couple times. Fortunately, I was close to an outlet. Plug it in, let it charge, great. But when it's in the dock, for example, and it ramps up its frequency and you're playing on the TV, it charges very slowly. Like slowly to the point where sometimes I'm not even sure it's charging fully, like at all. It kind of stays at a certain percentage. So you turn it off when you're done, and then it'll start charging, obviously, in the dock overnight. So the battery life is questionable. Now, I do think they can improve it. I already told you with the X2, they have the option of either more strength at that same power draw or just more battery life. And I do think they will opt for that. I think we will go from a 2.5 to 3 hour battery life with Zelda upwards of 5 hours. Has-Been Heroes will probably get to 6 hours because Has-Been Heroes does not push the system hard at all, as I've seen. And then, of course, there's others. Fast RMX seems to push it a little more, but does get anywhere between 3 and 4 hours battery life from what I've seen. So expect the X2 revision sooner than later. I would say 2 to 3 years because the X2 will be completely backwards compatible. It's almost the same chip completely. There's just added benefit of the larger memory bandwidth, like I was saying, and of course the lower power draw. So along with the battery life, I think the other thing that Nintendo has been waiting to really improve but has not is the flash memory space. Now, they have to be cost conscious here with this system because this system could not have come out at $400 with bells and whistles and people would have bought it. No, they were targeting the mainstream. They're targeting gamers who don't want to spend that much money because for an extra $100, they may have been able to double from 32 to 64 or 128. But at that point, you just spend $100 and get 256 gigabytes in a micro SD card. So why wouldn't you just do that? But I do think the internal memory at 32 gigs is low. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. I think it could have been better, but I do understand the cost consciousness there. It's tough because this system, while people seem to think should be less than $200 to make, it's not. The dock is not going to be cheap with the USB Type-C to HDMI and USB converter box. I've looked those up now after being kind of skeptical, and yes, they're anywhere from $30 to $40 depending on quality. And then, of course, you have the dock itself mixed with the power cord and HDMI cable for $90. Without all that stuff, it comes out to $60. So really, Nintendo isn't charging as much as we think for that dock, and it's tough. They're in a tough position because I understand what they're trying to do with this thing. They're trying to make it accessible for everyone. So you have a very convenient system, like I said before, but there are some cutbacks they had to make, which included that internal memory at 32 gigs, which some games have already exceeded that. Dragon Quest Heroes 1 and 2, the compilation, has exceeded that because it's 30 gigs. It's 30 gigabytes, and you get 25 to 26 gigabytes internally on this when the OS takes up its space. So Nintendo has created the most powerful handheld I've ever seen. Unfortunately, because they're also marketing it as a home console, people are comparing it to the PS4 and the Xbox One. And no, this system is not in the same league as those two when you hook it up to the TV. It's just not. It's not pulling nearly as much power, but if you did, I will say, if you did take how much power it's drawing to how strong the system it is, this is technically stronger then, because it doesn't nearly need that much power to achieve visuals that are at least close to those two. Now, we've seen Dragon Quest Heroes 1 and 2 play on the Switch with issues, and we've seen it play on the PS4 no problem. And I don't think anyone's arguing the Switch is not as powerful as PS4, it's not as powerful as the Xbox One, but it really doesn't need to be because it has the backing of Nintendo with their stellar lineup of games, and it has the portability factor. I can't take my PS4 or my Xbox One with me and play on the go. I certainly can't walk around, like this with a PS4 and Xbox One and play a game like a Zelda. That's just not happening. You have to sit down, you have to hook everything up to a TV and play. So I do understand why it's just not possible. The technology is not there right now, but it will be. I do see something like Volta coming around and being put into a Switch maybe 10 years from now, but it probably will happen, and eventually we will get to a point where everything's running 4K, but then here's Nintendo still sitting there with their stellar lineup. So it's going to be this is going to be a slow burn. It's going to be a long build to when the Switch is a powerhouse, but it will happen eventually. Those are my major gripes. I mean, really, there's not a ton to not like about this system in its current form. I think we'll look back on the Switch as being the first generation in Nintendo's lineup where they just create these type of hybrid systems going forward. We'll eventually get the Switch 2, the Switch 3. We'll see what they call it, obviously, down the line, but I do think 15, 20 years from now, we'll look back on this and be like, man, that's where Nintendo started everything. You know, that's where they had that big jump-off moment where they bring us a system that was truly different and had some really cool ability to it and potential. And it's just going to be a while for them to refine it. But you know what? Nintendo has done it. It took NVIDIA's latest chip, because the X1 is the strongest mobile chip right now that they could produce. It took that to get where we are now. And I like that Nintendo really went to NVIDIA and said, look, we want to do this, let's do it. So NVIDIA is a great company to get behind, because now that they have a place for their X1, we're going to see a lot of revisions start to come out from NVIDIA. They're going to really push their mobile chips to make the next Switch. So I'm very, very excited to see where the mobile market goes with these X1s, the X2, whatever they want to call the next one, the X3, and so forth. I really want to see how far they can push these mobile chips with the amount of power they're drawing. And you know what, Nintendo, you do have a good system here. There are some flaws, but overall, I think it's worth the money. I know right now some people may not really want to get it because it's kind of a Zelda machine right now, right? It's not. There are games, trust me. I've been playing Has-Been Heroes more than anything. Lego City Undercover just came out, which is a great game, although they are charging $60 for a game that's $20 on the Wii U. So that's kind of your choice there if you want to buy that. But there are games on the horizon. Mario Kart's out later on this month, for example. And then we get into ARMS, and we've seen Xenoblade here and there. Splatoon 2 is coming, and it's selling well. So it's going to be a big seller. It will. It's going to be a system that does really take over the sales charts as we go forward. I do expect it to eventually outsell the Xbox One. I think the PS4 is a tall order. I expect this system to fall somewhere between the Xbox One, PS4 sales-wise. But that is a massive win for Nintendo, because the Wii U, as we saw, was a flop. It did not sell well, and it was probably one of Nintendo's worst systems they ever released, next to like a Virtual Boy, for example. So yes, if you want to play the definitive edition of Zelda and you don't have a Wii U, buy the Switch. If you have a Wii U and all you're going to play is Zelda, get Zelda on the Wii U right now and wait for the games to come out for the Switch. Wait for Mario Kart, wait for ARMS, and then make the jump. I think if you have a Wii U, you could probably wait until summer, to the end of summer, midsummer, to end of summer, before you jump in and have a decent game selection to pick from, especially after E3, and we see what games are going to come out. Unless there's other games that appeal to you, or the convenience factor and the portability appeals to you, because if that's the case, you have a home run on your hands here if you really enjoy portable gaming, or it's just more accessible to you because you have other things around you to do. Yes, I would buy this if you have a little bit of cash to spare. Get it with the Pro Controller. It is worth it because you'll have a nice controller to use when you get home and pop it on the TV, and you can just kind of leave it next to the dock. So yes, Nintendo, good job on the system. I like it a lot. I've been playing it a lot. Persona just came out, so I'll probably jump into that, but I'm looking forward to what the future brings for the Switch, and really where Nintendo goes with this at E3. Hopefully they do something like Metroid, Monster Hunter, Pokemon. I mean, really at this point, Nintendo, it's up to you. You have a system that will sell well. You just need to support it with games and then pull a few third parties in. This system is not dependent on third parties, though. It just isn't. It's dependent on Nintendo's ability to move games that are good. So that's my initial reaction and month-long review on the Switch, guys. I'm not going to give it a number. I'm not going to give it like a something out of 10, because all that really provides are fanboys ammo to shoot across the battlefield at other ones, or it gives the Nintendo fans the ability to go and say, look, this guy gave it a 10 out of 10. I'm just not into the number scale. I've never been into it. Sorry, but pick it up if you like Nintendo systems. Pick it up if you want to play Zelda. That's it for now, guys. I will see you next time.